Good morning, everyone. My name is Carl Bates. I'm the leader of the Better Business Bureau here in Central and South Alabama. This morning we have two experts on the area of cybersecurity for your business and from your personal standpoint as well. This is a two-segment presentation, one today for an hour and one at the same time on Thursday for the second half of the course. We appreciate these two gentlemen being with us and being furnished to us by AARP as we co-sponsor this with them. And with that, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping things. If everyone will please put their audio on mute to eliminate any background noise, and ask any questions you have using the chat so the presenters can see that as they go through and answer those for you. Also, the video will be sent to you, a link to the video of this presentation will be emailed to you after the presentation in case you want to review it at your leisure. It will also be posted on our YouTube site. So with that, let me introduce our two presenters. First, Dave Morrow, who will be presenting today. Dave has almost 40 years experience in cybersecurity investigations and incident response. He had a 22-year career with the U.S. military in the computer area of managing and developing computer facilities, was a programmer, and spent 14 years as a special agent of investigating computer-related crime. After he left there, he was also the Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Security Officer for a major global IT services firm, and that covered global credit card processing and headed cyber incident response and threat intelligence for a major bank. That's a mouthful. He's taught cybersecurity concepts to small businesses for the final 5 years of his career, testified before Congress numerous times, has been brought in as an expert for court testimony as well, and has been interviewed and quoted in numerous publications. He's currently volunteering with the AARP as a national expert on cyber fraud and identity theft. So Dave Morrow will be presenting today. On Thursday, Alex Brewer, who is our second presenter, he's a native of Birmingham. He grew up in the Smithfield community and is a proud graduate of Parker High School. He's also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and has an extensive background in cybersecurity. Spans almost 3 decades. Specialty skills in the dark web analysis, which we all need to know more about, cybersecurity operations management, cybersecurity risk and compliance and governance. He is a community activist and a diehard volunteer for several organizations, including AARP. And one of his passions is ensuring that how he can help his community and make sure they improve their way of life and well-being. So Dave and Alex, thank you for doing this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to start our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carl. So good afternoon or good morning, folks. Welcome to the course. As Carl said, I'm going to be presenting today, basically the first half of the course, and then on Thursday, Alex will give the second half. Let me see if I can get these slides to change. Yeah, it's not wanting to change. Okay. There we go. So here's a quick agenda of what we've got in store for you today. A few kind of overarching introductory remarks where we will talk about basically kind of the rules of the road for cybersecurity, especially in a small business. We'll have some common risks that we see small businesses especially have, but they're common to all businesses in most cases. And actually common to your personal security in a lot of cases too. Then we'll dive down a little bit and talk a little bit about securing your applications, securing your data, and how to secure the devices that you have attached to your network. So let's get started here. Lou, if you can go ahead and change the slide, it'll be easier probably. It's apparently not here. Okay, next slide too. Okay, so security is not what I call a one and done thing. One of the major things when I talk to small businesses or almost any business as a consultant was that there were some people who believe that basically it's like, buy out antivirus, install it, and I'm done with that project. Let's move on to the next one. And cybersecurity is not at all that way. Cybersecurity has to be more or less ingrained into your business, whether it's large or small. Now, I've run a small business. I was a small business owner for several years. So I know that especially very small businesses are extremely resource and time constrained. But there's some things that you need to keep in mind as as the owner or person responsible for cybersecurity in a small business. First of all, you need to have constantly updated not only tools like antivirus and things like that, but what we call processes and policies in place. The processes being the things that you do on a routine basis. That's like having a weekly process on Monday morning to go in and make sure that the signature files for all your antivirus programs are up to date. Or a process, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, a process to make sure that when people come into your company or leave your company and have access to the network or access to a device, that you establish their account on the network, and more importantly, maybe when they leave, take them out of the network, make sure that they can't get back on. Because I've investigated, and I know Alex has too, a number of instances where people who have left a company under sometimes less than great circumstances will sit down and after being at home for a week or two, will grab their laptop or their computer and say, I wonder if I can still get back in, type it in, and suddenly they're back in the network. And sadly, some of those people decide they're going to do a little mischief while they're in there, and that causes some problems. Those are the kind of processes we talk about when we talk about in cybersecurity. And again, policies. One of the ones we'll talk about later on in devices is if you allow your employees to use their own personal devices, you need to access the network, to get email, to do whatever you need to do. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do because small businesses are, as I said, resource constrained. But you need to have some pretty firm policies in place about what they can and can't do with the devices on your network, what kind of protections they need to have on their own personal devices, because their devices, when they're connected to your network, are like a door or a window into your network that can be taken advantage of and used. It can be the weak point of your data security program. Ongoing vigilance. You need to be vigilant all the time and understand that there's always new threats popping up. And whereas this thought is essential, I mean, come on, realistically, you're in a small business and you've got a lot of other things to think about besides this all the time. So thinking about it is not necessarily obsessing over it. It's just basically when you read about something or hear about something or see it on online, whether that's a malware incident or a hacker or somebody attacking one of the big cloud providers like Google or Apple or somebody, and denying service. We call it a service attack to a bunch of their customers. You need to kind of understand that you could be vulnerable to that too, and figure out a way what you would do. Just having a plan. Maybe think about some tools. Maybe ask somebody what to do, what they do in case things aren't available as you think it should be. Thirdly, there is no single silver bullet. There's no single tool or service or anything that will keep you secure. And I know, especially when you're in business, there are always people calling you, telling you that they have the latest and greatest of something in security, and will imply, if not state, that if you buy my product or service, that's all you need to do. And that is not true at all. There are the way the market and the way are structured and architected. There's usually the most effective process is a layer of different tools, each doing their own business requirement. As I said earlier, anything you have attached to your network, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a mobile device like a tablet or one of your employees' phones, or a desktop in the main office, are a potential source of risk to your network and to your data. So you need to protect all of those and not overlook them. uh, small businesses, and as they get larger, they often try to decide that, it's more effective to outsource something to a third party, whether that's HR, whether that's hiring and firing and paying benefits and all that, or payroll is often one thing, that even to an accountant, outsourcing your bookkeeping to somebody. Or as you get larger, your company may want to outsource its IT because it just doesn't have the requirements or the resources to hire somebody to do their own computer network administration. Hiring those services is fine, but you got to understand that it kind of changes the way you look at security a little bit. It doesn't relieve you of responsibilities for securing the data that you have in your possession, whether it's another company's data that they entrust you with, or it's your employees' personal data, or your customers' personal data. It doesn't relieve you of the responsibilities just because you hire a third party to do that. If anything, it changes the relationship and changes security. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And finally, you need to know what you need to protect. You need to kind of have an idea of what's sensitive and where it's stored. Do you have customer data that has social security numbers and bank account numbers and credit card numbers and things like that? Or do your health benefits, you reside on, do you have your own health benefits servicing and they reside somewhere in your network as opposed to a third party? You need to know where it's at, and you need to know how to protect that where it is. You can't protect something without knowing you have it and knowing you're responsible for protecting it. So you really need to keep an idea of what you're responsible for and how you protect it. Let's do the next slide here. So what are some of the risks we have in small business? We've talked a little bit about them. Next slide, Louis. So a lot of the things are the same things we see in our personal lives. Here in the South, here in Alabama, physical disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that are always a threat. And you need to at least have an idea of what you're going to do if something happens to your business in the hurricane that's coming, or in the high winds that are coming. That's not all you need to worry about. There's always wildfires, not as bad here as in other parts of the country. We don't have them. It can be, some sort of accident, a fire in your offices, some sort of accident or incident with the service provider for your internet. How are you going to deal with those things? So those are one of the sets of risk. It's just kind of the world of physical disasters, and they can come at you out of nowhere. I mean, when I was first chief of security at a credit card processor in Tennessee, about 6 months in, my data center that was right across the street from my office, that ran the whole company, got hit by a tornado and ripped the roof off. And we came to work one day, and the whole building was ankle deep in water, including all the computers. And so we had to have a plan, and we did, and it worked reasonably well. But you just never know when that's going to happen. So physical disasters are something you need to think about. Data loss or corruption of your data, making sure that you can have hardware failures, you can have software problems that corrupts your data or loses your data for you. Everybody's had the experience, I bet, of typing a document up or working on something on a spreadsheet, or at least just accessing a document somehow, and then suddenly it's gone. So you need to understand how to deal with that. Ransomware is always one of the things. Malware, ransomware can always corrupt your data as well as cause data loss. And then there's sabotage. I mean, somebody can hack into your systems, or sometimes, sadly, insiders can do some mischief and sabotage your data. So you need to have to understand how to have some insurance against that, and be able to recover from that. At least have an idea of how to recover from that. The third one goes back to the third-party provider we talked about earlier. If you have a third-party provider out there that does your cloud storage or does your payroll for you, even a tax accountant, or you have an HR person that does your benefits, if they fail to do their job, if they get hacked because of a security problem, or if their systems go down, that's a risk to your business, even though somebody else is responsible for it. There's always malware and ransomware attacks. Those are the things that we all read about, and small businesses are not immune to those at all. Then there's what we call process scams. It can be somebody calls you and impersonates wanting to, get your data, or it can be somebody who impersonates, and this has happened, not here that I'm aware of, but it's happened in my past, where somebody who wanted to get into one of the offices actually impersonated a repair person, a telephone repair person, and came in and basically had run an office for a period of time. There's also what we call business email compromise, BEC. You see it on the slide there, and that's kind of something that not too many people are aware of, and they really need to be, because the FBI calls this the most prevalent business-related fraud in the country. And billions and billions of dollars are lost. And this is basically where they compromise your email to your business, send an email to the person that writes the checks or signs the checks, impersonating you or your CEO or somebody like that, somebody in authority, saying, "Hey, this is a big contract. After we've got to send this company a check very quickly, or this is an invoice we've got to pay right now, and just write the check and send it to this, wire our money to this bank." And the whole thing is a scam. They got in and compromised the email, and then impersonated a senior executive, and was able to get somebody else below them to transfer money out of the country. And that happens quite often to businesses, large and small, as well as organizations, nonprofits, civic organizations, churches. It's a pretty widespread scam, but not a whole lot of people talk about it. Network attacks. Somebody tries to hack into your network or attacks the capability of you to get to your network, or your customers to get to your network. That's what we call the denial of service attack of some variety. Or they try to get into your network, steal your data, or somehow monitor the network and take the data as it goes by. Phishing and attacks and hacking attacks. Phishing is probably what everybody understands, because everybody has it. In your personal life, everybody gets phishing emails, and phishing emails have gone light years ahead of the old Nigerian prince scam we used to see 50 years ago, and they're very good. And then the artificial intelligence coming on, that's going to make it even more difficult to differentiate between a legitimate email and a non-legitimate. So those types of attacks are always there. And then hacking, somebody can get into your business, and quite often now, in fact, most times that I've seen in the last few years, the way they deliver their payload and are able to install a backdoor into your network is through a phishing email that they click on the attachment, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or order document, and it installs malware on your system that allows them to log in without you even knowing it and do what they're going to do. So hacking is something that large and small business are really the main targets of those. And just because you're a small business doesn't mean they may not want to hack into your system for some reason. Let's change the slide, and we'll go talk a little deeper about some of the other. Securing your applications is a category that's vitally important in cybersecurity. Next slide. So a couple of things as a small business you can do to increase your security. There's nothing you can do. I mean, a truism in security is there's no such thing as 100% security. If an intruder or a scammer is dedicated and wants to spend time and money and risk getting caught, they're going to figure out a way around it eventually. It's just like your house and a burglar. If he or she wants to get in, no matter how your locks and alarms and floodlights are, and guard dogs, there's probably a way to get in if they're willing to risk getting caught. Spend enough time figuring it out. But what you want to do is secure yourself against the most common problems, the most common issue. Malware and antivirus tools are something that you really have to have. Every device that's attached to your network, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a mobile device, an iPhone or what have you, or an iPad or a big computer, needs to have antivirus malware tools. And it doesn't have to be something that's really expensive. I mean, most small businesses, especially the ones that are very small, under 10 people or five or 10 people, can easily use uh, home use or home version of the software. At the very least, a free version. You can get multiple licenses pretty cheap for those things, and you can just use them that way. As your company grows and if you outsource your IT, your provider may have an antivirus suite that they want, but just make sure that they install it on all the devices, and all your devices are covered or at least monitored and updated on a really regular basis, daily, sometimes hourly if you have some real secure or real problems. But make sure that their virus signatures and things that they use to detect the malware is kept up to date all the time, because it changes all the time. And the providers find new problems and issue changes or updates to their software to catch those problems on a continual. Second thing for applications is authentication, and by that kind of little IT buzzword, we mean how you establish accounts for people on your network, how they sign in, how you know they are who they say they are, because you don't know who they are if they're signing in from the field on an iPad. If they have the user ID and password, you just have to trust that it's them. But there are a few rules of the road in authentication that you need to at least do process, or some easily procured tools that will increase your security in your applications. First of all, passwords are probably consistently the weakest problem I see in both people's personal users as well as securing their applications for businesses. Your passwords, all the old sayings of upper and lower case and 8 characters, random numbers and letters, and no English words. Those rules, those are there for a reason. It makes it harder for a hacker to get a hold of it and to guess it. So you need to have rules and policies and enforce those policies, and for the types of passwords users have to get into their applications and get onto the network. The fact that they can't reuse those passwords over and over again. You need to have some policy, at least or maybe even informal policy. They can't use the same password for getting into your network that they use to get into CNN. They can't reuse the password between applications, and changing those things periodically. And in some cases, in the business environment, you can have someone do it naturally if you have a large enough installation or have an IT contractor. But you may wind up, especially smaller businesses, doing it yourself. So you at least need to change the password periodically, because they're going to get compromised or the people are going to leave. Passwords have been around a long, long time. I mean, I've been in this business since the 70s, and we had passwords starting in the 80s in a crude basis and in the 90s. But in the 90s, at the same time, passwords were really coming in. You started hearing people say, "Oh, well, passwords are so last century. They're going to be overcome by something else. Passwords, we don't need to use passwords anymore because there's something new technically coming down the road." Well, here it is 30 years later, and we still got passwords predominant. So what we did as in the security world is we augmented passwords vulnerabilities and the fact that they're pretty easily cracked if you're not careful, and added something called multi-factor authentication. Again, a nice IT buzzword, which really just means, in addition to your user ID and password, I can make sure you're you because you have something that only you have. And those 3 things have to be correct before you're allowed access. So that second factor might be your thumbprint. It might be your visual on a screen. Most commonly, small businesses, a lot of businesses, use a callback way where, if you have the user's cell phone number, you text them a 4 to 6 digit number, and they have 30 seconds to put it back in before that number resets, and a new number is effective. And that's okay. There are vulnerabilities with everything. So, there are vulnerabilities with that capability, but it's certainly better than nothing. So make sure you have some sort of multi-factor authentication, and that where your data is stored, banks, for example, have to have multi-factor authentication of some sort for their customers' accounts. Make sure all that's in use, because more and more companies, providers, Amazon, and others are offering multi-factor authentication capability. And if they offer it, you ought to take them up on it and use it. You need to make sure that the accounts that you set up for your individual employees on your network are individual accounts. So in other words, you shouldn't have the capability to have your assistant share your email or your credentials so they can sign in for you and read your email. That's a big one for a lot of corporate executives. So they need to have their own user ID, password, and because it goes to accountability. If something goes wrong, you can follow the trail back. An investigator or somebody looking into what caused the problem can follow the trail back and say, John here signed in, and when things started going haywire, maybe there's something wrong with his computer, or maybe he was doing something that caused this, and you go back and fix it. If the same user ID and password are used by everybody in the home office, 6 people, it makes it a lot harder to identify what happened in the case something happened. So have your own, make sure everybody has their own accounts, make sure that you have a process in place to bring on board people, which basically is bringing new people in when your business grows or you get a new employee. You need to assign them a user ID and password. Somebody needs to do that. Usually it's somebody like the office manager or something like that. But more importantly, from a security standpoint, when they leave, somebody needs to disable their account, especially if they leave in less than auspicious circumstances. If you have to fire somebody or you have to let somebody go because of a layoff or something, and they just don't take it well. That's a particular vulnerability for business, because those people, as I said, can be sitting at home for a couple of weeks and pull out their laptop and say, I wonder if I can still get into the old company, and suddenly they're in, and if it's all up to them then if they do something nefarious to your data or to your network. So make sure you have separate accounts. Make sure that the account administration for putting new employees in and taking them out is there. Somebody knows they're responsible for that, and if somebody has a process in doing all the paperwork to sign somebody up, that network sign at that point. And similarly, when somebody is leaving, there's paperwork to do and such, making sure that their account on the network and access to your data and all the devices that you've lent them, if they're your devices, have been turned in, is part of the process that they need to have to leave the company, to exit the company. Finally, securing your data at third parties. This is a big problem in all businesses. Small businesses kind of to a lesser extent, because it's probably not quite as rampant for lots of security to be outsourced to a third party. But if you have data at a third party, whether it's your HR data, your benefits data for your employees, whether it's your tax data, whether it's your bookkeeping data, any kind of data that you have at the cloud provider or one of those, you need to understand between you and the provider where the responsibilities of security. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about data security. But there's a big disconnect in most companies I consulted with over my career after the military. Big disconnect between what the providers will do for security and what they're expecting you as the owner of the data to do. So you just need to make sure that data is secured when they have access to it, that you know what they're getting, and that they know what you expect of them as their provider. Let's do the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about data security. We talked about applications. Let's talk about the data itself. So having data. Louis, can we get the next slide? Oh, thank you. Again, no sensitive data you have, whether it's your financial data, whether it's data that your customers are entrusting you with through your website, through the services you offer on the website or your Facebook page or whatever. If you have partners and they entrust you with data, make sure you're responsible for that. So that's you really need to understand that, and even having an informal list of what data your company is responsible for, and is written down on the back of an envelope in your drawer is better than nothing if things start going. And one of the things you really need to think about is what would cause me a lot of trouble, time, or effort, or maybe customers, if I lost this data. I mean, if I had a breach and somebody came in and got the data, or something happened with hardware and the data was destroyed, how much problem would it be to get that data back and protect that accordingly? You know, if it's pretty inconsequential data that you could get back pretty easily, you probably don't need to spend much time and money and worry about it. But if it's going to cost you a lot, or it's going to hurt your reputation, or lose business, or injure your customers or partners, it's more effort into making sure you know where it is and you're responsible for. The key information you identify needs to be encrypted. Now, a lot of devices nowadays, I'm on an Apple Mac now. Apple products, usually modern ones, encrypt on the fly that you don't even know about it. Some Windows products do and some don't. But you can easily encrypt your data. You just need to understand how to do it. There's encryption tools out there that you can use. But your key information, if it's not encrypted, is at risk. But if it is encrypted, it makes it that much harder for the bad guy to get a hold of it and make use of it if they do get a hold of it. Control the access to the data. We talked about like the provisioning and who has access to your systems. Well, you need to make sure that not everybody in your company needs access to the payroll. Not everybody in your company needs access to the salary information or other things, sensitive information they have on hand. So they shouldn't get data. They should have access to the data that they need to do their job, but they don't need access to everything. And that is up on the line. When we're talking about data, don't forget, I mean, it used to be back in the day that you had a big computer in the sky and everybody signed into that computer, and that was the one that everybody used, and nobody had, we had terminals on the desk or whatever. But nowadays, you can have, my smartwatch can download data, any laptop, any tablet can download data. You can have data on all kinds of mobile devices. And don't forget that when your data is attached to an email or something and somebody downloads that to read it on their own device, they're downloading your data at the same time. So you can't forget that data on mobile devices when you're securing it and thinking about what you need to do. Securing data in the cloud. Again, if you have access to a third party that stores your data or does processes like HR or payroll or even IT, an IT provider, you need to kind of make sure you understand what controls are on the access to that data that they have, contractually, what are their responsibilities, and contractually, what are your responsibilities? How are they going to protect your data versus how they expect you in the contract to protect your data yourself? Because that's a big disconnect I've seen in the last few years, is in cloud providers think that, and their contracts usually say, they'll provide security to their network and their devices that they provide you as a service. Your data on their systems is your responsibility if it's sensitive to protect. And many companies have had data breaches and lost some serious data files because they put a file out there on the cloud storage that they didn't have any protection because they assumed that the provider provided sufficient protection, and they don't. Always read. If you're going to have a third-party provider on any kind of services, make sure you understand by reading the contract and discussing with them and have it in writing what they're responsible for and what you're responsible for, what they're going to do in case something goes bad or an incident, how you will be notified, especially with the big companies. You may be, if the big cloud providers that you use, if you for your company and something goes bad with their data and somebody gets into their network and starts taking data or whatever, you're going to be one of 500,000 customers clamoring at their door wanting to know what's going on. What kind of access and information are you going to get, or are you just going to get the canned response that they give everybody, including the media? You need to kind of know, understand how that provider is going to react. But just remember, if you entrust data to any third-party provider, you're probably going to be responsible for protecting that data on their system yourself, software-wise. So you'll run the access controls, you'll run the security around the 1,000 cells once they're stored. If they're encrypted, you're going to need to encrypt it. So you just need to be ready to understand that if you're talking to a third party. And finally, the big thing we used to call in the Air Force the foot stomper. If you don't remember anything about today, remember this. Please back up your data. Please have backups that run automatically. It doesn't have to be necessarily something real fancy, but you have a, once a month, once a week, once a day, if it's really sensitive data, go in there and back it up and store the data somewhere where it's secure. There's lots of cloud providers out there that will back your data up in an encrypted format on their system on a routine basis. But you need to back that data up because it is key in so many bad situations. Malware, hacker takeover, ransomware, a lot of things you read about could be hugely mitigated if they had a good backup on hand where they just basically reformat the computer and start over again. That's the easy way to think about it. So also, when you have a provider like we talked about, make sure you understand what they back up versus what you back up, and do they think you ought to back up your data even though it's on your system? Because I've had small businesses that had issues with one of their cloud providers because they thought the backups, that the provider did backups and they can use those, and a lot of times they can't because it's not done frequently enough, or it's not aimed at that type and architected for that type of use. So make sure you back it up. It can be as easy as a simple automated system to do an external hard drive for your local devices, or a cloud-based repository of some sort. But also make sure that you know how to restore the data technically if you have to. Because nothing's quite as embarrassing as a whole bunch of backups and not know how to restore it, or the person that knows how to restore all your data is just left. So you need to kind of make sure that you keep that whole cycle in mind, that if you have backups, someday you may need to restore it, whether that's to a server or to your laptop. And so you may need to understand how to do that. Let's hit the next slide, Louis. So now let's talk about how we do devices. Now, devices are one of the Achilles heel, if you will, of a network and a small business from a cybersecurity standpoint, because having too many devices or having devices on your network is a business imperative. Otherwise, why have it? If you have folks in the field using handhelds like in the picture here to take orders, or having customers sign work orders once they get finished, your employees finish working at their house, or whatever. Every one of those devices is, like I said, a potential window or door into your network if it falls into the wrong hands. Let's hit the next slide. So what do you need to do to secure your? First of all, you got to know all the devices that are on your network. And sometimes in even small businesses, that can be a challenge. But that's absolutely imperative that you know who's allowed and what devices are allowed on your network and what aren't. And you manage that. You keep an eye on that. So all the ones that have access to your network, whether it's a smartphone or a laptop or a desktop or a tablet, should have its data encrypted. And when you look at buying or look at leasing, if you lease laptops and lease equipment for your customer, for your employees, you need to really look at that as, is that something that comes with the system, or we need to add that? It needs to be encryption needs to be table stakes for having any kind of devices attached to your system. You need to kind of control and know what kind of devices, and thus the users, have access to your sensitive data. What applications can they run? You need to manage those kind of individually to make sure that folks in the field services in your company, for example, who are in customers' homes, can't have access to the payroll or can't have access to your corporate books, or can't have access to other customers' data, because if that laptop or desktop or laptop or tablet gets left or forgotten, then somebody may have access to your data. So you need to have that access control. It needs to be protected by a password. All your devices need to have passwords enabled. Every phone, every anything that has it needs to have that multi-factor, which has a user has your password. It also has some way to verify it besides the password, a multi-factor authentication. And you need to have the capability to use what we call remote location and remote wiping. It's the technology in the Apple world called Find My iPhone. It's basically have some way over the internet to be able to find a device that's lost or stolen, and remotely reach out and wipe the data that is on there without having to physically have the device in front of them, erasing the data. So then it's basically, they can have the device, but you make sure that the sensitive data that you have is not included in what they get. If your company issues devices to their employees, or to your employees, you need to kind of keep track and inventory of what devices they have. And when they leave, part of that process for them leaving the company needs to be getting those devices back. Because take it from me, because I know from bitter experience that once they walk out the door with your laptop or your iPad, it is really hard to get them to give it back in some cases. And sometimes you never get it back. So you need to have some sort of idea of what they have and some sort of responsibility and policy that they know that they're responsible for. Finally, let's talk a little bit about personal devices in cybersecurity. This has been a big hot button issue in the cybersecurity community for like 5 or 6 years now. It's a decision that your business leadership needs to make as to whether or not employees can download their business email to their personal iPhone, Android, whatever, laptop, tablet that they own. Because then that data can get commingled with your data or their data, their personal data. You can have company data that gets downloaded and they walk off with it when they leave. And if you decide to let them do that, you need to have some rules. You need to have some policies in place, and they need to know what those policies are and be communicated. Tell your employees if you have some policies on can they use their own personal device to do business, and if they can, establish some ground rules of what they can and can't do while your network is being accessed by their device. The kid can't play games on it, for example, a big one I get into a lot of times. But your data is still on their devices. It's still your data, and you need to be responsible for it. You also need to, they also need to understand that from time to time you may need to reach out and wipe that data. There are little packages on the market now that you can install if you allow your employees to use their personal devices. You can install a little application on their device that kind of walls off your data from theirs and allows you to, even if they keep the device and they leave the company, allows you to reach out and erase that data, even if it's not there. They don't even know about it. So you gotta figure that no matter how good your relationships are with your employees, or how much a family you are, which a big comment I've gotten from small business owners who had bad incidents by employees that they thought were great employees, that for some reason things went south and they turned out not to be, and bad things happen. That can happen, so you just need to make sure you have those types of situations at least covered to the best extent you can if they walk out of your door with your device or their device with your data on it. So Lou, let's hit the last slide. So that pretty much covers the the ideas that we wanted to talk about in the first half of this. Do we have any questions in the chat? Do we have anybody got any thoughts?
Anybody have any questions? If you do, feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat. Dave, I don't see any, but thank you very much. That's a great overview of that. I do want to remind everyone that we will be sending you a link to this part of the seminar as part one. When Alex joins us on Thursday morning, we'll be talking about operational security, network security, cyber hygiene, credit card security, and how to respond and prepare for an incident. As an overview of the Thursday portion of this, with Alex presenting for us and answering questions for you, particularly the cyber hygiene is particularly important, I think, for all of us. Certainly it is for the Better Business Bureau in that. So with that, I want to say thank you. You're going to pick up a few minutes of your day back, and we'll see you for part two on Thursday at 11 o'clock. Thank you all very much.